times 6?
8 times 6.
My name is Vaughn Belle. I am a Virgin Islander. I live and work in St. Croix. I also then, later in my life, lived in Cuba, and that's where my husband is from. So I live with him, and I have 3 beautiful, very rambunctious daughters. As an artist, my work centers on questioning our coloniality. We've changed colonial hands 7 times, and that mark and the effects of that is not really past, it's present, because also of our current relationship to the United States, and in particular our past one to Denmark. And that tension that's created between our past and our present really affects our future.
Vaughn Belle bor i Christiansted, som er hovedbyen på St. Croix, den største af de tidligere dansk-vestindiske øer. På øerne vil man gerne tiltrække flere turister, og noget af det, man forsøger at sælge øerne på, er historien, hvor de mere end 200 år med dansk styre har sat tydelige spor i arkitekturen.
Everything about the buildings are colonial, from the foundation up. A lot of times when people look at the buildings in the town, they say that they are Danish buildings, but they're built by the Africans. So when we look at the foundation, we're looking at the coral stone that the enslaved Africans were sent into the ocean to cut. What's interesting is that a lot of times that part of the building gets covered up.
I slavetiden var der et særligt område i Christiansted, hvor de frigivne slaver havde lov til at bo. Og der har Vaughn Belle sit atelier.
It's not just my studio, but it's also an art project that I've been working on called the House of Freedom Built. The interest in the old buildings for me first began as an aesthetic interest. They're beautiful, they're well designed, they're well built. But when I bought this building, my studio, and I learned about the history of the previous owners, it made me see this building in another way. When I learned that some of these same people that were able to lift themselves out of slavery also owned slaves, that I had to sit with that. It didn't seem like it made sense. It's like, how could you try so hard to not be a slave and then turn around and own slaves? And so I really had to sit there and think about this system that was created, where people were the money. When you're left with certain systems and structures that the colonial system created, where you were the capital, and now you're left in a society where you have to navigate that. There are lots of things that we're still struggling with from our government, because remember, our government was not created to benefit us. It was created to benefit the people that were in power. We've tried 5 times to write our own constitution, and we failed. And part of the reason is our identity issues. Because each time the question comes up, who are we? And we cannot define that. Those are implications that come out of our coloniality, our past and our current with the United States. These are called Cheney, and Cheney is a hybrid word that means China and money. They're broken fragments from the colonial pottery that we find in the soil. Children in the Virgin Islands, what they would do is they would round them to look like coins, which is where the money part comes from. And jewelers today now use them in jewelry. My first trip to Denmark, which was in 2008. So I was walking down the pedestrian street. There was a store that caught my attention. It's the Royal Copenhagen. And up on the 3rd floor, they used to have a museum. And so I'm looking and I'm seeing all these plates, and all of a sudden I start to realize, wait, that's this. It was very impactful because I had realized at that moment that I'd only ever seen the fragments. I was really compelled to find out, do they have any plates that deal with the Virgin Islands? I went on the internet and I actually found some plates, and I wrote the curator. I introduced myself. I said I'm an artist from the former Danish West Indies, and I was invited here to do a project. I'm interested in looking and investigating these plates that deal with the Virgin Islands. And his response to me was one of those things that characterizes our relationship. And he said, no, those plates are packed away and they will be for a very long time. And I thought, wow. And that experience taught me, you know, we have a lot of archival information that is in Denmark that we don't have access to. Virgin Islanders need to see some of these objects, images, and documents because we will have a different story. And our story is just as valid. I did a series of work of those plates, but I had redone them in paper. You know, one of the things that I had learned from that experience was how removed Danes were from our history. It really felt like we had been sold, and then not just sold and disposed of as physical, but the memory too was discarded. That's what you do with paper plates. You know, the function is just to use them, and when you're done with them, you throw them away. And then the second series of work that came out of that experience of being in the Royal Copenhagen were these paintings. I have a series of work that I've developed that's called Cuts and Burns.
Cuts and Burns er inspireret af et oprør i 1878, hvor det meste af Frederiksted, den anden by på St. Croix, blev brændt ned. For selvom slaveriet var afskaffet, var forholdene for den sorte befolkning ikke blevet bedre.
And it made me think about the fact that the tools that were available to the African people were burning, fire, and cutting, you know, taking the same cutlass that they were forced to work with, and that now is their weapon. And in English, this cuts and burns is also something that happens when people go through psychological trauma. You might have heard of the people that they will like make incisions into their skin because they're in so much pain that inside. And I thought that was interesting, that connection, because there is still so much pain. If you start to really talk to people about the impact that slavery has had on them, hundreds of years later, I was never a slave, but when you talk to people, the pain is still there. So this work deals with the documentation of that. You know, it's both what I love about it is I was able to find a way to document the resistance and the rebellion, but also the pain.